You're listening to the Stoic Solutions Podcast, practical wisdom for everyday life inspired by the ancient tradition of Stoic philosophy from Greece and Rome. I'm your host, Justin Vacula. This is episode 90, a Manual of Reformed Stoicism, with Piotr Stankiewicz. Recording in April of 2020, we speak about overcoming adversity in a pandemic, mindfulness, mindset, happiness, and finding fulfillment, drawing on themes presented in his new book, A Manual of Reformed Stoicism, released by Vernon Press. Visit my website at stoicsolutionspodcast.com for past episodes, social media links, helpful resources, and a form to contact me. Support my efforts through Patreon to receive special perks, including having upcoming podcast guests answer your questions, custom-made podcast episodes, and private one-on-one calls to discuss whatever you'd like. Visit my other podcast project at hurdygurdytravel.com to learn how to make money, save money, and travel the world at next to no cost with credit card rewards, deals, and loyalty programs. Today's guest, Piotr Stankiewicz, is an author and philosopher from Poland who published Does Happiness Write Blank Pages? On Stoicism and Artistic Creativity, and Manual of Reformed Stoicism, both by Vernon Press. On with the episode. Enjoy. All right. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
All right. We're here to discuss your new book, A Manual of Reformed Stoicism. But first, we're recording here April 14th, 2020, amidst a pandemic. We'd like to talk about that first. How has it changed your everyday life?
We've been staying at home for almost a month now, which is a challenge always, psychologically, but also like that we have a 2-year-old around. It makes, everything just more complicated and more demanding. Lockdown situation with remote work and everything like that. But basically, on the philosophical, on the stoical side of things, I believe that this the entire lockdown, the entire pandemic situation is kind of a visualization of Stoicism in the sense that it makes everything more intense. You cannot escape the fact that we are in a difficult situation. You cannot escape certain problems, certain challenges. You cannot escape asking yourself certain questions about what exactly you want to do with your time, with your life, and so on and so on. So in a way, it's kind of makes everything more tense, more intense, and kind of more questioning. And then if this pushes someone into Stoicism, then why not?
Right. And how does Stoicism help in a time of radical change like this?
Things have changed. Whatever that is that we are experiencing right now, it is a great time to read Stoics and to practice Stoicism in a way, because it's a very particular time, very specific time, and Stoicism is something that is both timeless and timely. Kind of reminds us that for me as a human being, every time is specific. Every time is very particular. In a way, the metaphysical position I'm in is always just the same. And the pandemic situation we are experiencing right now is kind of, as I said before, makes it just more tense, more explicit, that I need to, as a human being, I am facing certain number of certain types and certain types and numbers of problems, and I cannot avoid them. And in the pandemic situation, it makes everything more real, so to speak. That would be probably the Stoic answer here. And as always, whatever I have to take on, it is the best way to go if I take it on stoically. So the same goes with the pandemic. Whatever I'm trying to cope with the situation in a stoic way, in which I do not always succeed, but the important thing is to try.
Right. Some people might experience some high levels of anxiety, despair, uncertainty is definitely with many. So Stoicism is giving us a framework on how to tackle these things.
Anxiety, fear, uncertainty are very human things, very human feelings, and the pandemic situation just kind of makes it more intense. It is impossible to not see that anxiety, fear, and so on. It is impossible to not experience that. So in a way, it brings this human metaphysical situation on a higher level. And of course, everyone is talking about it right now, and what to do with that, how to deal with that, and so on, and so how to live with the situation, which are very Stoic questions, obviously, if you follow them with Stoic answers.
Right, without the ability to just go and travel and change our surroundings or indulge in entertainment outside of our apartments, maybe. Right,
Yeah.
Some people, instead of facing problems in some cases, they'll say, oh, well, forget it. I'm just going to go to the movies. I'm just going to go on this trip, whatever. And the Stoics even warn us that we can't escape our own thoughts. Wherever we go, we're still there. So here's this time where we have to face those challenges.
Our life is radically changed for the time being. As you said, we cannot travel, we cannot do all the number of things that we are used to be doing normally. The common wisdom has it that whenever there is a disruption in your life, whenever you're forced to kind of realign the way you're living your daily life, it is a good time to ask yourself certain questions. In a way, they are kind of imposed upon you, and therefore this makes it a good time to deal with Stoicism.
Right. I really like Seneca's chapter, the letter, A Lesson to be Learned from the Burning of Lions, where he talks about a man who revered his city, and all of a sudden there was this great fire, this conflagration, as he called it. And he was thinking, how can I rebuild from this? Everything is so different now.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I hope we are. It's not the conflagration still. I mean, I hope that the world is not coming down in flames anytime soon. I hope this is not the path we are on right now. But definitely, the coronavirus is a huge challenge, psychological challenge, but also political, economical challenge, and so on and so on and so on. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's basically where the entire teaching of Stoicism takes effect. So as I said, it's a good time to practice Stoicism, to turn to Stoicism, but also, in some way, paradoxically, the Stoics will tell you that every time is good to turn to Stoicism.
Right. There's the thing of you keep training for the Olympics, but the Olympics is today. the event is now. Don't delay. Time is creeping up on us. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And you have that in my book, in the Manual of Reformed Stoicism, that you need to focus on the present day and on the present action, that you have to act in a deliberate manner, and so on and so on and so on. That the present time is the only plug-in that we have, the only platform we are able to work upon, and whatever is in the past or in the future is kind of not in our control, in a way unreal. So the only way we kind of put our effort in is the present moment. So yeah, that's a very Stoic thing. Although for the Olympics, and guys who've been training for the Olympics for many months, and now the Olympics are postponed.
Oh, I was meaning the metaphorical Olympics here. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's also, in a literal sense, it's a good case, because that, I believe that for the sports people, that must be a very, very challenging and difficult situation. I'm not sure if I would be able to cope with that stoically.
Yeah, and in some cases, people can see these apparent negatives as some positives, where maybe the athlete can say, oh, now I have time to train more. Now I have time to refine my practice. Or sitting at home, I felt, oh, well, I have all these items that I have to do. I have these goals, and now here's some extra time to do that. Of course, I don't prefer this situation to happen. We don't wish disease. I think of a Seneca who said it's only the madman who wishes the disease to come. But if the challenge does come, I'll be ready for it. I'll be prepared, and I'll make the most of it.
Perfect. That's a perfect Stoic reasoning, and that was basically what I was prepared to say later on in this interview. But in the sense that, from my point of view, and this is the angle I take in my book and in my work on Stoicism in general. The Stoic teaching is that you have very limited number of things in your control, which basically is it's a very short list, and on that short list, you have the values you're trying to upkeep in your life and the goals you're shooting at, like, for example, train for the Olympics, and the way, the general direction in which you are trying to shape your own moral character. And getting to those values and goals, if, for example, my goal is to be best prepared for Tokyo 2020 Olympics, and then when this goal is forcefully crossed out of my list, then the Stoic thing to do is kind of to turn to another goal on my list. For example, to focus more on my, on my family or on some other duties that I was having, not regarding the Olympics. Yeah. So that's the Stoic reasoning. I need to keep that list of values and goals long enough so that any turn of events like cancellation of the Olympic Games won't disturb my decision making. I mean, I will always have something. The goal is to always have a goal or a value to shoot at, regardless of the external circumstances. But in this particular case, the actual Olympic Games being called off or postponed, it is a very difficult and stressful situation for the folks involved, I believe.
Right. So how can people adapt? You talked about goal setting. How can we work on that? How can we establish these challenges for ourselves, or some ways that we want to improve ourselves?
This is actually one point in which I believe, in my interpretation, this Reformed Stoicism kind of diverges a bit from the original doctrine, because I believe that today, meaning in the 21st century, in the world we presently live in, we need much more room for individual choice and for personal independence than the ancients had in mind. The ancients, meaning Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. When I read the ancient Stoics and when I kind of immerse myself in the original Stoic doctrine, it strikes me as a bit of a one-size-fits-all kind of thinking, that you need to assume certain Stoic way of thinking, and it will benefit you. And it will benefit you, but it is one and the same way for every person. Today, as I said, in the 21st century, I believe the thinking should allow much more latitude for choice in mentioned goal setting and value setting. So, for example, guys who are training for Olympics don't usually write books during their training program. But let's say my plan for 2020 was to publish a new book, let's say, and to write some pieces for the internet or for traditional media. I mean, some smaller pieces. So, and if my big book gets, let's say, postponed because of the coronavirus, that may be painful, but then I get more time to work on my time that I wouldn't have if the book was on its track to be published. And basically the Stoic optimism, as we can say, is that you always have somewhere to turn to. You always have some values and goals that you can pursue, no matter what your situation is. And the big challenge and the big courage that is required in human life is to be open-minded enough to find those values. So, for example, with a sports person trying to be prepared for the Tokyo Olympics, the Olympics gets postponed. It may be a severe blow. Yes, that's a very difficult thing. But the Stoics will say there's always something else to work for. So maybe some other games that you can participate, or you can kind of reschedule your training program so that you won't be perfectly fit this year, but you'll be more prepared. Be open-minded so that you can see that there is always some value or goal that you can pursue no matter what your situation is.
Right. The Stoics talked about acceptance a lot. And things, yes, being outside of our control, all these external circumstances. So we're not to wholly depend on one thing happening or casting our certainties toward the future, right? That we're to understand and embrace the fact that life is volatile. In ancient times, people dying at a much earlier age, people being exiled, and now we get a slight taste of that here with the pandemic. Yes,
exactly what I was about to say. Yeah, that the pandemic, the coronavirus is kind of one big reminder of what the past used to look like. Maybe not in a literal sense, but yeah, it's kind of a blowback from the blast from the past from some ancient time.
Right, and probably a lot easier for us as we have better standard of living, we have technology, we have all these other things to occupy it. It seems so strange to me when people are talking about, I'm bored, there's nothing to do. What am I to do? Where
yes.
Every day I could keep myself very occupied and productive, and also mixing in a good amount of leisure as well.
if you want to talk Stoicism behind the word productive, for instance, then that's exactly this reasoning, that if I want to be productive, I need to, in a way, rely on my own decision making, rely on my own goal setting, rely on my own planning on what I'm trying to do, achieve, and work on. And this is this thing. If you are relying on the, so to speak, outside world for the agenda on your own in your own life, then you can be significantly disabled if the world shuts down around you, right? And so this is the Stoic thing that you need to, and that's perfectly in line with my Reformed Stoicism, that you need to be very conscious and very self-aware about your own values and goals, and about setting them up for yourself and following them and crafting them in a way that makes you, in a way, immune to outside events.
Right. It's about having that strong mental framework and embracing many of these lessons and virtues throughout the text, whereas many people perhaps didn't or don't have that framework, and they're just going about day by day. Maybe they don't have these set goals, and Stoicism can certainly help people with that to orient themselves for a positive philosophy of life, and even talk in the text about finding meaning in life, finding a sense of fulfillment, and thinking about what really matters to us, and not being overly concerned about things like fame, appearance, notoriety, all of these things that people might place all of their hopes in, but maybe that doesn't amount to that much as they would have thought.
The word positive, again, rings very well in my ears here, because this is something I believe Stoicism is, or at least should be, that Stoicism shouldn't be perceived, shouldn't be seen as just a kind of a shield or a defensive philosophy against the blows of fortune and all those disasters and setbacks that happen to us in life. It is but it is much more than that. Stoicism enables us to be as productive and as positive as it is possible in a given situation. I never would be able to be as productive as I am, or as positive, if I'm positive, as I am, if I weren't Stoic. I mean, it is a general observation. Stoicism is not about just defending myself and, in a way, passively accepting the way things are. It is about empowering my agency to do whatever I can do in the best possible form and manner. So that's a point which is in Reformed Stoicism very important to me, that Stoicism is in a way is about being on the offensive with our projects for our own life and of our own moral thinking. It's not about being on the defense all the time and just kind of shielding ourselves.
Right. You might see some articles here and there about, 10 life hacks from Stoicism, but they're not delving very deep into the philosophy or recognizing some of the wisdom from the ancients.
Life hacks are kind of, the concept of a life hack is in a way something which is negative in a sense, right? That you have a problem, so you need to hack that. You need to be smarter than that. You need to kind of find a way to work around the problem. But the thing about Stoicism is that, in my opinion at least, is that it is useful, relevant, vital, and kind of empowering, even if we do not have any problem or adversity in our life. Whatever our situation is, we will benefit from approaching a situation in a Stoic way. That's one of the points I believe in.
Yeah, and even embracing a frugal lifestyle, that's been something that's been really important to me. Whereas, okay, if I can be more careful with my spending, I don't need that Louis Vuitton wallet or whatever designer item. I can be pretty happy with what I have, being prepared, and then that avoids getting in this trap of the paycheck to paycheck lifestyle.
That's another very important topic for me, because yes, on the one side, on the one hand, you are absolutely right. You shouldn't do all the things you mentioned. You shouldn't, spend what you do not have, and and live overly luxurious lifestyle, particularly if you cannot afford that. But on the other hand, and this is very important to me, I don't think that Stoicism is only about a frugal life. I mean, of course, frugality and this idea of simplicity, and above all, focusing on what is really under your control, that's a Stoic tenet. But it is important to realize that Stoicism is much more than that. Stoicism is not just about living your life very simply and very frugally. You can be, as Marcus Aurelius says, wherever you can live well. If you are a very rich person who can afford all the things you mentioned, like Louis Vuitton and other stuff, you can do that stoically. This is important to me, that Stoicism is not necessarily philosophy of asceticism. It is not about renouncing all the material wealth and so on and so on and so on. And this is tricky, and this is the sophisticated point here, because in many cases, I mean, most people who have money, I mean, it's a very common occurrence that people who have money will kind of spend too much of it, live too luxuriously, and they will kind of identify themselves through the material goods, right? And this is obviously a non-Stoic thing to do. A Stoic will never identify himself or herself through the material goods and through the wealth that they have accumulated. The Stoic thing to do is to use the material outside goods, your wealth, money, possessions, whatever, as an instrument, as tools that you use to your own goals. And it is not important. Again, it is not important what kind of tools you have or how many of them, but what you can make out of them, the use the work you put them, what kind of work you put them to. That's the point here.
Right. And from a broader case, there's a mindfulness that's called for by the Stoic authors of just paying attention to what's going on, being aware, being in the present, and really questioning the value of everything. What must be traded for what? How are we to live our day, right? What are we going to do today? It was even what Marcus Aurelius saying, man was not made to stay under the sheets. Oh, it might be comfortable, but just staying in your bed all day won't amount to much. You can be more than that. There's this call to action.
Yes, absolutely. So starting from there are kind of two lines of thought here. Starting with the latter one, absolutely. The man is not made. No human being is destined to stay in bed. The thing is that Stoicism is a philosophy of living an active life, of doing things, and of being productive and positive with our own life. And this means, getting out of bed, literally, and also in a more general sense, and taking on life and all the challenges and demands that it has for us. So yes, we need to live. If we want to live stoically, then we need to live an active life. I believe this is true both in original Stoicism and in my interpretation in Reformed Stoicism too. So that's one thing. So I totally believe I do practice mindfulness a bit myself. I mean, it's not a consistent thing, but every other, let's say, month I have this kind of return to mindfulness and trying to follow its routines. And I totally believe that Stoicism and mindfulness in certain dimensions are close to each other, and they are not rivals, they are not enemies, and they can work together. They go together very well. And there is a lot of Stoicism in mindfulness, and there is vice versa, a lot of mindfulness in Stoicism too. The idea of observing your thoughts in this kind of non-judgmental way, just letting them go, and not be and learning to not get attached to thoughts. Those ideas coming from mindfulness are very Stoic too. This is the key Stoic realization that myself, I am not the same thing as my thoughts. Thoughts are to some extent not under my control, and therefore I need to be able to kind of observe them as they just pass, as they go by, they kind of flow downstream. And through mindfulness, I can learn to do that, and it is a very Stoic skill. So there is a lot of common ground between mindfulness and Stoicism.
Right, a lot of talk in Epictetus about challenging your impressions, those automatic thoughts, or perhaps those developed thoughts about things, and saying, okay, maybe I should question this. Maybe things aren't as bad as I'm making them out to seem. Maybe I'm just catastrophizing here, right? So being skeptical about that and trying to distance ourselves from that. He mentions anger, for instance, as being something that can be quite destructive, something that he would experience but doesn't want to, and wants to become better and, yes, distance himself from that.
I believe this is totally the common ground between mindfulness and Stoicism, and those the conceptions. And in Reformed Stoicism, in my book, I call them narratives. I believe this is the more modern, more fitting term, narrative, the story that we are kind of telling to ourselves about things, the way we frame things, the way we kind of narrate the world to us ourselves. This is the narrative we have. We need to first realize that our misery and happiness does not depend on facts and events themselves, but on the narrative or narratives that we have in our head about them. Just, this is the kind of a translation of the concept of the idea of conceptions or impressions in Marcus Aurelius. So we need to first of all realize that we are the problem of identity, that we are not the same, we are something different than our conceptions or narratives. We have this capability to be independent from them, and then to change them according to our will. And it will never be a fully successful process, but we are able to control them to some limited degree, and that's already a lot.
Right, and we're to have some realistic goals. We're not going to just suddenly wake up tomorrow and be suddenly radically different, but it's just a process. And certainly being aware of those negative emotions, those faulty beliefs that we have is a great start, whereas some people would just not be aware at all and continue on their ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And this flashes back in a way to mindfulness again, because this is what mindfulness is all about, that you're not able to stop your thoughts coming up in your mind entirely. The only thing you are able to do is you are able to kind of detach yourself from those thoughts. You can observe them in an independent, non-judgmental way. Mm-hmm. No one is able to kind of squash completely the voice in their head, but to get some control through kind of this non-judgmental observation and being kind of above and beyond that voice. This is the thinking in mindfulness. And again, this is very similar to Stoicism, because this control over the narrative, the voice we have in our head, is kind of very limited. But still, if we exercise the little power we have, that's already a lot. Because this is clear in Epictetus, that he says that when I try to force myself, using my own terms now, whenever I successfully try to force the stream of thoughts that I have, then it will kind of very easily catch on and follow the direction I wanted to go. So it's about exercising the powers we have, and it is a constant struggle, right? You're never fully successful, and already ancients were aware of that to be a perfect Stoic, it is a very rare occurrence.
Right. So we're not going to set that high of a standard for ourselves, but certainly we're going to set a good standard, right? Something that's realistic, something that we can do. And even in the works of Seneca, he talks about even the most practiced musician, even the most practiced orator or speaker, they still have that kind of anxiety, that blush of modesty, as he says. So no matter what we can do, sometimes we can't completely get rid of some of these emotions that we have, but we can certainly recognize them, handle them well, and still find a lot of joy and positivity in life.
It's kind of an aspiration that we are trying to project ourselves in a certain direction, and we will never be able to achieve that ideal for fully and consistently. But the effort made in this direction is always beneficial to us, and even a very small step, a seemingly very small step, means a lot and changes our life a lot. So that's my thinking. Yes.
Right. And there could be a lot of negative self-talk and people who just beat themselves up over certain things, but the Stoics don't encourage us to do that at all, where some people might say, oh, I'm terrible, oh, I'm unlucky, oh, this and that, and taking on all this blame and just punishing ourselves in the process. The Stoics certainly aren't encouraging that.
Basically, the Stoics will tell you that you do not have to think about yourself in this harmful, self-debilitating way. That's kind of obvious, but the entire challenge is in the implementation, how you learn yourself to not think about yourself in a negative way. And I believe that these kind of harmful thoughts about oneself, psychologically harmful, self-debilitating, are very, very common. And I think that most people deal with that problem. And again, Stoicism kind of teaches us how to realign, how to override these negative emotions, negative thoughts, and negative patterns of thinking, right? To change those patterns of thinking to some more positive stuff. This is the Stoic direction here. And to be more specific, for example, some time ago, I kind of came upon this idea that whenever something adverse happens and whenever you have some kind of a major problem in your life, try to find 3 silver linings in that and try to just spell them out or put them down on a sheet of paper or just say them out loud, however stupid, however stretched they seem, however irrelevant they may seem. And it's this kind of a mental trick. And I kind of, for curiosity, tried, I started doing that, and it works. Even if you come up with a silly thing, then it kind of plays magic on you, because the Stoic sense of that is that you are learning yourself to realign the way you think. You're kind of showing yourself that you do not have to follow the stream of your thoughts, that you are able to redirect that stream. And that's a very empowering and great tool, even if it sounds stupid at the outset, as it did to me.
Oh, no, there's definitely that message of hope within Stoicism. And even some of the authors talk about journaling their thoughts to just be more aware of what's going on, especially during the night where we could be within our own thoughts before going to sleep and there aren't all these other things going on.
That's for sure. You recap your entire day and you do the plus columns and the entire summation of what happened. Yeah, but my deeper idea here was that even if something that, first of all, again, in the 21st century, in Reformed Stoicism, in the present day, we don't have to kind of follow everything by the book. We are in a way supposed, and we have the right to cherry pick ideas from the broad spectrum of Stoic teaching. And if something works for example, for you, the idea of doing this before bedtime, if it works for you, then you can go with that. If the idea of finding 3 silver linings in every problem works for me, I can do that part. So this kind of individualization, that you, me, and everyone else have the right to pick and choose whatever works for them. Because again, Stoicism is broad and multifaceted thing, and we need to allow for individual choices within that spectrum.
Right. Even Seneca referred to ideas of rival schools as being good ones, where he would mention Epicurus, for instance, a lot in his texts.
I didn't mean going that far. But the idea is that, for example, in my book, you have those 26, I believe, chapters, and each and every of them is one principle in a more precise way, a spiritual, like in Pierre Hadot, a spiritual exercise. And you have 26 of them in my book, for example. And my idea isn't that you have to follow all of them at once, or that you have to, kind of embrace all of them, implement all of them in your own life. The idea is that you kind of immerse yourself in this stuff, and then you kind of put on what works for you. And that's the thing here. You don't have to work Stoicism in all dimensions and all directions at once. You need to kind of suit it for yourself.
And let's talk about death. As I think with the coronavirus, people are worrying. People are wondering, oh, maybe I'll get it. How am I going to face this? What are some thoughts that you have, or the ancient Stoics have, surrounding death?
Not only Stoics, philosophers in general tend to talk a lot about death. And in antiquity, there was even this kind of a saying, or this adage, this idea that philosophizing is nothing more than actually, learning how to die, or that to learn to philosophize is to learn how to die well, or how to be able to die well. Very deeply ingrained in the philosophical tissue way of thinking. But the problem here, and why I'm calling it a tricky answer, is that I don't believe that we, and we as people, as human beings, we do not necessarily fear our own death that much. I mean, it is a fearful death is a fearful thing, but in an actual life, as it really happens, we usually fear more for the death of a loved one, a parent, a child, a significant other, and so on and so on and so on. That's the curious thing, because the ancient authors spent a lot trying to spend a lot of time trying to explain to us that we shouldn't fear our own death. The problem is that I believe that we do not actually fear it that much. We are fear more about the prospect of a loved person dying and potentially. And this is a much bigger challenge, I believe.
Right. And what are some steps that we could take to prepare?
In Epictetus, you'll find all those crazy ideas that we should every time we put our child to sleep, we should kind of do this kind of visualization that the child will die during the night, or that, for example, or we should imagine some kind of a favorite cup that we have, and then that this cup breaks, and we should apply the same way of thinking to our loved one, or in a different way of thinking, that we should always keep in mind that our whoever we wanna call that, our friend, our significant other, our child, or whoever else we care for, is just a human being, which means that they are mortal. They will die at some point, and therefore we should not be surprised or frightened by the prospect of them dying, because it's a natural thing, and this is in the essence of being a human, that we are mortal. So that's the ancient way of thinking, and I do have a bit of a problem with that, because it is kind of tough in a way that I'm not sure we should. That is a problem to me. I mean, if you'd ask me about what problems I see in Stoicism in the 21st century approach to Stoicism, then I probably will tell you this: that the Stoic teaching about how to prepare against the prospect of a loved one dying is kind of not in sync with the modern sensibility. That would be
And I see an acceptance there, that there's, again, the talk of everything in life is liable to destruction. So value the present, prepare for these adverse outcomes. There's the talk, and I have a hard time saying it sometimes, it's what the premeditatio malorum, or anticipating these negative outcomes, or things that we would view as negative, so that way we're prepared and we're not just suddenly taken off guard.
Yes, absolutely. This in Latin it's premeditatio malorum, just as you said, anticipated it. In the more psychological language, it's called negative visualization. In my book, in turn, is called anticipate mishap, anticipate bad things that may happen, and that's very true. Whenever I'm not certain about the outcome of some decision or what will happen next, I need to be prepared for the worst. But the thing is that when we're talking about, my favorite sports team losing a game, or, me not making enough money from my investment, or, that kind of stuff, it's kind of, easy, and it makes sense to be prepared, in this deep sense, to be prepared for the worst. But when it comes to it, a human being that I love and I care for, the idea of, actively visualizing their death, or kind of being prepared for their early departure, is kind of is a bit more problematic, or a whole deal more problematic.
Are there other parts that you talk about in your book where you depart from some of the ancients' wisdom?
The one big thing that we didn't cover is that in the ancient Stoicism, one of the dogmas was that the world, the universe in general, is kind of well organized, that it is a rational living being full of this kind of divine force, divine potential that kind of keeps everything together and makes it rational, makes it reasonable, well organized, this kind of harmonious whole in which everything and everyone have their part to kind of play, right? So that was the original view, and this is something that I'm not sure that today in the 21st century, observing what's happening in the world, I'm not sure if we are and knowing also knowing in the scientific way, knowing things that the ancients didn't know about how the things are going in the natural world, but also observation of the political life and everything else that has happened in recent centuries. This is kind of makes me very, very reluctant to this idea that the world is a well-organized, rational being. And in Reformed Stoicism, in my view, it is much more important to be able to live in a way, to live stoically, to be able to live stoically no matter what we think, regardless of what we think about the world, whether or not the universe is a well-organized union of parts which, full of divine forces and so on, or if it is a more, chaotic place in which, there is just the randomness of atoms and void, as Epicurus would say. Regardless of how we resolve that metaphysical debate, we should be able to live like Stoics, and this is something I put emphasis on. That it is not about that the Stoic life today shouldn't be based on the idea that the world, that the universe is rational, good, and well organized, but more on this kind of independence. Whatever the world is like, we should live stoically, and this is on some level it is a departure from the original doctrine. On some level, this draws from Marcus Aurelius in his Meditations, these kind of dilemmas between the chaotic world or organized world that they are clearly present. So I believe this is not something totally unorthodox, but I'm kind of building on one.
Right, and even in Seneca, there's talk about not being slavish to the ideas of the past, that we can recognize past teachers, but build upon what they've done. And in some cases, we'll recognize some differences, and we'll have to move on rather than being stuck in an completely ancient mindset. We could meld the ancient observations with the modern, and in some cases we'll find some discrepancies.
The entire project of Stoicism in the 21st century, in my case, Reformed Stoicism as I call it, is that how we, as you said, how we can be Stoics and not be enslaved to the past, how we can take the original doctrine and kind of readapt, reframe it to make it useful and vital and valid today. So at some points we can just follow the ancients, and in some points we just need to depart from their teaching. But this is basically what I believe makes that philosophy something relevant and inspiring.
And some also have the misinterpretation that Stoics are joy killers, or they're not fun, or they're just these android non-emotion kind of beings. And I've countered that in the past and said that I think Stoicism allows for more joy in life because we're not bogged down by so many of these intense negative emotions. We're seeing the world as it really is, so that allows us a lot more mental room, I think.
It's kind of a different line of thought from the previous one, but yeah, referring to the idea of joy, I believe that the ultimate goal of Stoic philosophy is to be joyful, is to find happiness, and that it is okay to use this, the phrase Stoic joy is not paradoxical. What we want to find as Stoics is Stoic joy, and the optimism of Stoicism is that mentioned Stoic joy will be always more profound and more lasting and more satisfying than any earthly joy, any ordinary joy, any usual joy of human life. That would be the optimistic part of it. And the entire teaching of Stoicism is about how to find that joy, that you need to focus in the things that you have in your control, and so on and so on and so on. So yeah. That's because even the word stoical is kind of this idea of lifeless figure with no emotions at all. This is this thing, and I believe this is a stereotype. Stoicism is much more active, much more joyful than many people think.
Yeah, the dictionary definition that you'll see is a lot different than what the ancient philosophy is. That these words have acquired some meaning, even with the Epicurean. Some people might think, go out there and feast all day. And I don't know, just some indulgence lifestyle, right?
Yeah, so this is a kind of a paradox, right? That you, in ordinary language and the way that people talk, you don't hear many times of people saying that they are Kantian or
Those humans over there.
Exactly. So you're laughing, which basically proves my point. But you have this word for being stoical, but being stoic attitude. This makes sense in the plain language. In a way, Stoicism was so successful as a philosophy that it made its way into ordinary language and into the way people talk. But it came at a price, and this price is kind of oversimplification or even stereotypization. And my project in Reformed Stoicism and in other things I do in Stoicism is to kind of reclaim, is kind of get this word to its proper meaning and to battle, to combat those stereotypes.
Right. So the language could be much more difficult, and we're talking about an ancient tradition. And
language is very misleading. If we talk about a word coming from ancient Greece from two millennia back, there are certain associations with that I totally do not believe are correct.
Yeah, even happiness, as people today might think of it as, okay, that indulgent lifestyle, but the Stoics are thinking about it a lot differently and thinking about this concept of eudaimonia, right?
But I'm not sure how many people really still think that happiness is to be found in indulgence. But obviously that's happiness and eudaimonia, because the thing here is that in a way it is difficult to kind of precisely define what is the goal of Stoicism. What is it all about, and what's the actual end of all this? But if we agree if we agree on certain intuition, then it is kind of very easy. We just say that we all are trying to live a happy, satisfying, good life, and some will call that eudaimonia, some will call that happiness. But if we do not stick on the level of words, we, I believe, understand, this pursuit of happiness, as the phrase goes. We understand what you're talking about, and this is something I believe Stoicism is based upon.
A good way to mostly wrap things up there. Just two more things to lead us out here. Can you tell us more about the Modern Stoicism organization that you're part of?
And it is a website, modernstoicism.com, obviously, is a kind of a loosely defined network of people doing Stoic things. I mean, writing books about Stoicism, running Facebook groups on Stoicism, doing Stoic meetups, and kind of various activities on various fields, all of them involving Stoicism. And this is quite serious. I mean, there is this annual Stoicon event we mentioned before. I mean, before our interview started, that is kind of happens every year. This year it is scheduled to take place in Toronto in October, and it's a couple hundred people from all over the world. So this is a serious thing, and there is a blog with a few entries every week, I believe. And basically the modernstoicism.com is also a good landing site if you want to learn more, get to know more about what is happening in Stoicism online. It's a good place to go. So that's the idea. That's kind of a organization in which people do various things about Stoicism. Some of them are in the academia, like fully fledged Stoic scholars. Some of them are basically authors writing books on Stoicism and another topics. Some of them are therapists that's another very interesting avenue to pursue, therapists who use Stoicism in their practice and write about their experiences.
How can people find you and your work online?
But I'm working on the website for my Reformed Stoicism, and it should be up someday soon. So that will probably be the best way to go. The site for Reformed Stoicism.
All right, great. And for people to buy your book?
Oh yeah, just vernonpress.com or the Amazon. The publisher is Vernon Press, and you can read parts of the books online.
All right, and that's once again a Manual of Reformed Stoicism. All right, and listeners, you can find the links in the show notes. All right, any final thoughts?
I think it was a very deep and meaningful conversation, to the extent that I have this nice feeling that we have, covered all the most important stuff, and that just, thanks for having me, and nothing to add at this point, which is in a way a stoical feeling, right?
Fulfillment at the end.
We've done good work here, and I think we are good. So thanks for having me. Thanks for listening, and keep calm and be stoic.
Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more content. Visit my website at stoicsolutionspodcast.com for past episodes, social media links, helpful resources, and a forum to contact me. Support my efforts through Patreon to receive special perks, including having upcoming podcast guests answer your questions, custom-made podcast episodes, and private one-on-one calls to discuss whatever you'd like. Visit my other podcast project at hurdygurdytravel.com to learn how to make money, save money, and travel the world at next to no cost with credit card rewards, deals, and loyalty programs. Podcast music, used with permission, is brought to you by Phil Giordano's symphonic metal group Fairyland from their album Score to a New Beginning. John Bartmann offered free consultation and audio edits for episodes 51 through 63. Thanks to generous patrons and fans of this podcast who help support my work. Have a great day.